I want you to imagine just for a second, standing on the deck of a massive oil tanker.
Oh, yeah, right in the middle of a churning ocean.
Exactly. Just you, the crew, and thousands of tons of highly flammable fuel. And then suddenly, a fuel fire breaks out.
Which is pretty much the worst case scenario out there.
Right. And in that exact moment, the only thing standing between the crew and a total catastrophe is this thick white foam blasting from the ship's fire monitors.
It's literally a lifeline. I mean, without it, you're looking at a disaster.
Yeah, exactly. But here is the crazy part. By January 1st, 2026, the International Maritime Organization is banning that exact foam.
Yeah, the maritime industry's most trusted firefighting weapon is just getting completely outlawed.
And that is exactly what we're digging into for today's deep dive. We're looking at this massive impending collision between environmental protection and, well, life or death maritime safety.
It's a huge shift, and to really get into it, we're pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources today.
Right, we've got regulatory updates from ship suppliers and Viking, some really eye-opening environmental data from Oxal, and a super gripping analysis by Captain Raghu Sharma from the Deep Draft.
Yeah, Captain Sharma's piece really breaks down the operational nightmare this is going to cause.
Totally. So, okay, let's unpack this. To understand why this ban is so disruptive, we first have to understand why this specific chemical was used in the first place. You know?
Right, like why it's considered the sort of magic bullet for fires.
Yeah. And looking at the infographics from our sources, traditional AFF, that's aqueous film forming foam, it extinguishes fires in 3 distinct ways.
Which is what makes it so incredibly effective on a ship.
Exactly. So first, it creates this physical foam blanket to smother the fire. Second, it cools the whole area with water. But the third way is the real magic.
Yeah, the fluorinated surfactant. That's the key.
Right. It drains this fluorinated surfactant that forms a vapor-suppressing film. I like to think of it as like a magical high-tech shrink wrap.
That's actually a really good way to put it.
Yeah, it instantly seals off the fuel from the oxygen, and it prevents reignition even if the ship is violently pitching back and forth in salt water.
And what's fascinating here is the chemistry behind that shrink wrap. It relies on PFOS, which is perfluorooctane sulfonic acid.
Right, part of the whole PFAS family.
Exactly. These chemicals were literally engineered to be indestructible. They repel oil, they repel water, and they repel extreme heat.
Which is exactly what you want when you're fighting a raging oil fire.
Right. But that indestructible nature is also their fatal flaw. They are forever chemicals.
Meaning they don't break down, ever.
Never. They are entirely non-biodegradable, they bioaccumulate in marine life, and they are highly toxic.
And the sheer amount of this stuff out there is just staggering.
It really is. The Oxal data shows that roughly 60% of firefighting foams currently in use still contain PFAS.
Wow, 60%.
Yeah. And without bans, like the one the EU just enacted, we'd be looking at an estimated 470 tons of these chemicals entering the environment every single year.
470 tons? That's a massive amount of toxic chemical just flowing into the ocean.
It's totally unsustainable. And, the science on this has been settled for a while. PFOS was officially listed for global phase-out under the 2009 Stockholm Convention.
So from an environmental standpoint, the ban makes perfect sense. The cost to the oceans is just too high.
Absolutely. No one is arguing that we should keep poisoning the environment.
Right. But moving from this global environmental treaty to the gritty reality of a ship's engine room, that's where things get incredibly complicated.
Complicated is an understatement. The timeline alone is a nightmare for ship owners.
Yeah, let's talk about that IMO mandate. So as of January 1st, 2026, any new ship being delivered has to be completely PFOS-free.
Right. And for existing ships, they have to remove or replace it at their first official survey in 2026.
And the threshold they've set, it is astonishingly strict. They're allowing no more than 10 milligrams per kilogram of PFOS.
Which is about 0.001% by weight. Basically zero.
Basically zero. So how does a ship owner even prove that? They can't just promise the surveyor that they scrubbed the tanks, right?
No, not at all. The burden of proof is entirely on them. They need a certified manufacturer's declaration.
Okay, but what if they don't have that paperwork? Like if it's an older ship or the supplier went out of business?
Then they're in for a world of pain. They have to do actual onboard sampling and send it to a lab for testing.
Oh, man, and that can't be cheap or fast.
No, it takes weeks, and it costs anywhere from $300 to $500 per sample.
Just to detect these tiny trace levels?
Yeah, because it requires highly specialized analytical methods. You're looking for 0.001%. It's incredibly precise.
Wait, so is this just about draining the giant foam tanks on the deck, like the big central systems?
You would think so, but no. And this is a critical detail that Captain Sharma points out in his analysis.
Okay, what does he say?
The ban applies to everything, down to the tiny 9-liter and 20-liter portable units.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and even the 45-liter wheeled extinguishers that are tucked away in the machinery spaces.
Wow, so every single extinguisher on the ship is under this microscope.
Every single one. And here's the kicker. Because those small units in the engine room are exposed to constant, intense heat, the concentrate inside them degrades way faster.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. So the ambient heat just cooks the chemical.
Exactly. So those tiny, easily forgotten portable units might actually be the very first things that fail in inspection.
That is wild. So you could have your massive deck tanks perfectly compliant, but a single handheld extinguisher in the engine room gets your ship detained.
Yep. It's a total compliance trap.
Okay, so the deadline is set, and the paperwork is clearly a massive headache. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, the actual firefighting part.
Right. What happens when you actually swap out that magic PFOS foam for the new environmentally friendly alternative?
Well, they don't work the same way at all.
Yeah, let's look at the alternative. It's called F3, which stands for Fluorine-Free Foam. And unlike the old AFFF with its three-part attack, F3 only has two ways of fighting the fire.
Exactly. It is the foam blanket and the water cooling.
But it completely lacks that high-tech sealing film. The shrink wrap is just gone.
It relies totally on the physical bubbles to smother the fire.
I was thinking about it like this. It's like trying to smother a campfire with a really thick, heavy quilt rather than a fireproof tarp.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It works, but your margin for error is razor thin.
Right. If the quilt shifts or gets a hole in it, the fire just bursts its right back through.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this difference in chemistry creates some truly terrifying vulnerabilities at sea.
Terrifying is right. Captain Sharma's analysis lists some real-world operational challenges that are they're kind of mind-blowing.
They really are. The first major one is what he calls burnback sensitivity.
Right, because F3 drains faster, right?
Exactly. The foam loses its liquid content and structural integrity much sooner. So if the blanket breaks, the fuel vapors escape and the fire just violently reignites.
Just because a few bubbles popped. That's terrifying on a ship full of oil.
Yeah, and then you have the saltwater issue.
Oh, right, because obviously out on the ocean, you aren't fighting fires with fresh drinking water. You're pumping seawater.
Right. And Sharma points out that some of these new F3 foams actually lose their expansion capabilities when mixed with real seawater.
Wait, really? The salt messes with the foam.
Yeah, the ions in the seawater interfere with the non-fluorinated surfactants, so the foam drains even faster than it would with fresh water.
That feels like a massive design flaw for a maritime firefighting system.
It's a huge challenge. But honestly, the scariest part is the wind factor.
Yes, the wind data in the report was wild.
So F3 is marketed as fully approved by the IMO, right?
It passes all the lab tests.
But those lab tests are done indoors or behind heavy screens with wind speeds of less than 3 meters per second.
3 meters per second, that is barely a breeze.
Exactly. It's like 6 miles an hour.
And out on the actual open ocean, you're dealing with what, gales? Massive crosswinds.
Huge winds. And out on a real ship deck, those fierce ocean winds can easily just tear up the F3 foam blanket.
Because it doesn't have that chemical shrink wrap underneath to hold the seal, the wind just shears the bubbles right off the fuel.
Precisely. Which means crews might need much higher application rates just to outpace the wind.
Or they might have to totally change their nozzle elevations, just trying to force enough foam down to get any coverage at all. So if this new foam behaves completely differently in the wind, in seawater, and in the engine rooms, I mean, you can't just pour it into the old tanks, right?
No, definitely not. That is a recipe for absolute disaster.
So what does a ship physically have to do to prepare for this? Is it like draining your car's oil, putting in a radically thicker fluid, and just hoping the engine doesn't choke?
That is actually a perfect analogy. It comes down to rheology, which is the study of how fluids flow.
Okay, and F3 flows differently.
Very differently. F3 foams are significantly thicker. They have a much higher viscosity.
So they're kind of goopy compared to the old stuff.
Exactly. And because they're thicker, they can completely upset the flow balance in the ship's existing proportioners and inductors.
Those are the mechanical parts that mix the foam with the water, right?
Right. They rely on very precise pressure drops to mix the chemicals at an exact ratio. If you put a thicker fluid in, it drags in the pipes.
Which means you end up with a weak, watery mix that won't even form a proper blanket.
Precisely. So the physical reality of this transition is massive. You have to drain all the tanks.
Which means enclosed space cleaning, right?
Huh.
Sending crews in to manually scrub out the residual toxic PFOS.
Yep. And then you have to coordinate the onshore disposal of all that toxic waste at approved thermal destruction facilities.
That sounds incredibly expensive and complicated.
It is. But critically, after you refill it with F3, you have to run proper acceptance tests.
Because you can't just cross your fingers and assume the thick new goop works with your old pumps.
Exactly. You have to prove it works. And the stakes of failure here are they're catastrophic.
Let's talk about those stakes, because it's not just one type of system on these ships.
Right. On the main deck, you have low expansion systems. Those aerate the foam at a ratio of about 12:1.
Okay, so 12 times the volume of the liquid.
Yeah. But down in the machinery spaces, where the risk of an enclosed fuel fire is the highest, they use high expansion systems.
And how much do those expand?
They flood a room at an incredible rate of 1,000:1.
1,000 to 1. That's literally burying the entire engine room in a mountain of foam in seconds.
Exactly. But if the new, thicker F3 clogs the proportioner during an emergency and that system fails to flood the room,
then the fire burns out of control and the ship is lost.
the ship is completely lost. The engineering tolerances are that tight.
Wow. And even if there's no fire at all, just failing to have the right paperwork by 2026 means what? A SOLAS deficiency report?
Yep. SOLAS Chapter 2 deficiency. Port State Control will literally detain your ship. You won't be allowed to sail.
So what does this all mean? If you're listening to this, we all want clean oceans. We all want an end to forever chemicals.
Absolutely. The environmental data from Oxiel is undeniable. We can't keep pumping PFOS into the marine ecosystem.
Right. But as we've seen today, you can see how a perfectly logical regulation on paper crashes directly into the unforgiving reality of a storm at sea.
It's the ultimate friction between policy and physics.
Yeah, environmental compliance is critical, but it just cannot come at the cost of immediate fire safety.
And right now, the regulatory deadline is moving a lot faster than the operational reality.
Just to quickly recap our journey today, we started by exploring why PFOS was this miracle firefighter, right? The magic shrink wrap.
Right, and then why its toxic bioaccumulative legacy led to this incredibly strict 2026 IMO ban.
We looked at the logistical scramble for compliance, the lab tests, the burden of proof, the fact that even tiny handheld extinguishers are caught in the net.
And most importantly, the alarming physical differences between the old chemical foams and the new F3 foams.
Yeah, the burnback sensitivity, the saltwater issues, the wind shear tearing the blanket apart, and the high viscosity clogging the pumps. It really leaves crews vulnerable in a way they weren't before.
It completely changes how they have to fight fires.
It really does. And this raises a bigger point.
Yeah, this raises an important question that I think we really need to sit with.
Let's hear it.
As we rush to phase out forever chemicals across all industries, I mean, from our raincoats to our electronics to our critical safety gear, are we risking the creation of new, immediate vulnerabilities?
Just because the eco-friendly alternatives haven't been truly battle-tested yet.
Exactly. Haven't been tested by time and wind and chaos. How do we balance saving the planet over the next century against saving a ship's crew in the next 5 minutes?
That is a deeply unsettling question, but it's exactly what this industry is grappling with right now. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. As always, keep asking the hard questions, and we'll catch you on the next one.